The topic's really on sustainability and sustainable strategies for a resilient supply chain. I'm talking to some of our friends earlier today and talking to a few other people outside. Many of us have different definitions of how we think about sustainability. I've talked to a few people who talked about really around ESG strategies. Is ESG important? Absolutely yes, but is everything ESG equal to sustainability? I think sustainability is a lot more bigger. Are you as an organization thinking about how you're doing, what you're doing? Is it sustainable for you, for the environment? Not just from an environment point of view, from a governance and a social point of view, but from the point of view of your financials, your supply chain ecosystems, your customer communities, the different other partners who come and work with you to help deliver what you think you're delivering, right? That concept and meaning of sustainability has a lot larger meaning than just ESG. Similarly, if you want to switch over to how do we think about what is the definition of resilience in our business context? Everybody has a different business model. Today we've got representation from Boeing, there's Hyundai, there's Staff A. I'm sure this definition of how you think about resilience could have its own connotations, right? So what I would love to do is just start by getting a sense of how each of these leaders are thinking about what it means to them, and then get into a few questions in terms of how we think about it. So first question I would like to really ask Ashwani is, could you really help us define from your point of view and your business mindset, your business footprint, how do you think about sustainability and those strategies, and what do you think of resilient supply chain, and what do you think are the interconnections?
First, in terms of the footprint that we have, and in the networking session, I was a little surprised that a lot of people are still not aware what Boeing does. So possibly we're not doing a good job, getting to the media and talking about it. So we source about $1 billion every year in products and services, and some of the most critical parts are manufactured in India. We have a joint venture with Tata's in Hyderabad that makes the Apache fuselage, and they just delivered the 737 vertical fin. Some of the critical wire harnesses are sourced from India. Some of the critical structures, you would have heard about Apaches and Chinooks. Most of the structures are delivered from India. We do forgings, we do avionics, we're doing actuation, we're doing thermoplastics. So we're growing in the footprint. Now, before we define what sustainability and what resilient supply chain is all about, it is also important to understand that in the aerospace and defense world, it is possible that you have single sources. And very often, the capital or the non-recurring expense is very high, so you can't develop multiple suppliers. So if you have to have a sole supplier in a region, you have to make sure, and in the previous panel, somebody said it's all about trust or dependable supply chain. So resilient supply chain, in my mind, is about having a trustworthy supply chain. It's a measure of health of the supply chain. And there are two factors. One is about resisting the disruptions. If you read some of the reports in the media, they'll tell you that every 3 years there is some level of disruption, whether it's pandemic or economic disruption and so forth. So the first element is the ability to resist the disruption in the industry. The second piece is, after the disruption is over, your ability to recover. And third element is you have to deliver to customers. So your ability to deliver to customer in any situation, any scenario. So that is what I think resilient supply chain is all about. And in the global sourcing world, and the previous panel talked about it, I believe this is the most important element. Cost has taken a back seat, as some of the people already talked about. So it is about resilient supply chain. Now, moving to sustainability, you're right. I mean, the definition for different people is different. At the company level, it covers the full gamut. And in aerospace world, the most popular thing you would have heard about is the aviation fuel. But it is about protecting the environment, health and safety, even while delivering the product to the customer. From supply chain perspective, which is what I handle, ESG definitely is an important element. But we have expanded the definition of each of these elements. So for example, In the E world, which is environment, we are partnering with the industry groups. So most of the industry or aerospace OEMs are getting together to lay out a unified policy on how do we manage the environmental deliverables of suppliers. Health becomes important. Uh, in case of environment, before I miss this point, look at logistics. A lot of parts fly from India, and that's where the GHG emissions come into picture. So we have run several projects out of India where we have reduced the GHG emissions in logistics. That is one element of what E is all about. And then health, health and safety is absolutely critical. And then governance, it goes to the laws and regulations. So I can talk more about that, but I think that's what sustainability to me means.
For a long time, at least for me in my learning days, what I used to catch attention from many people when they talked about environment, the first example used to be the carbon footprint from airplanes. And I would have assumed that that's probably also one of the first areas where you should be thinking about how you develop some of these focus areas and strategies.
Net zero. Net zero is the new hero. So that's what it is.
That's good. Well said. Thank you. This concept of how we think about sustainable strategies and resilience, again, because it's so unique, I will probably repeat the question to the other two gentlemen because we have different business models here at play. And I'm thinking that should bring in a different flavor of how we think about it. So, Mohan, just requesting your perspectives on that same question.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Sundaram. I am from Hyundai Motors. I'm the general manager. There's no need for any kind of much introduction about the Hyundai Motors, which everybody knows what we are in. Especially the pre-COVID and post-COVID, as well as the Suez Canal disruption and the ocean freight cost, which has spiraled close to about 400%, has taught us a lot of lessons on the resilience supply chain. So these pain points, we have taken it as a learning, and we started innovating a different strategies for us. Because the reason being, for a car to be built, it takes about, considering our production capacity, we produce 1.5 cars every minute, which is roughly translated into 2,500 cars per day. That's the capacity of us. And close to about 3,500 parts goes into one model of the car. Like that, close to about 12 to 15 models of the car in the various facets like domestic, export, left, right, all those things and all we make. You know how complex the supply chain and the parts supply will have to be factored and will have to be managed. So what we did was basically, in order to ensure there should not be any disruption and the seamless supply of parts, post-COVID, we did a backward integration to some extent wherever it is possible, not for all the parts, which is not practically possible for the automobile industry. But we did quite a substantial vertical integration, which means a lot of collaboration has happened with the various industries, and a lot of industries has come within the vicinity of Sriperumbudur on this, which made us to supply the part even post-COVID on a JIT, just in time, which is the mantra of any automobile industry. Still we practice that. Of course, the inventory level or the days have increased. The cost, of course, is also matters for us because we are in the segment of A and B segment cars. Cost is also very important for the customers in India. So considering all these factors and all, we did a backward integration as well as the vertical integration, predominantly vertical integration, which has made the supply chain resilience. In terms of sustainability, you must be knowing like there are 3 levels of the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. We are just, or rather say like we are almost in the completion of scope 1 area. We are going into the scope 2. And the same is being percolated to our vendors also. And almost all the vendors are being sensitized how the sustainability will have to be factored in their production. in their regular operations so that our operations are not affected. That's what we practice in terms of sustainability as well as resilience on it.
Maybe one of the most integrated industry verticals ever in terms of supply chain upwards vertical. I think there's auto is probably the North Star across different industries. Everybody aspires to be there, and auto industry is probably already there in many shapes and forms. But when you talk to many auto leaders, and like you just said, right, the opportunity to continue to do more is so much more.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. But talking to many other industries, I continue to think that auto is probably the gold standard in this entire conversation.
Exactly.
Great. Chandramohan, I'll just switch over to you again. I know the relevance of the question is different from your business point of view. You're also partly auto, but you'll have your own style given the agricultural footprint that you guys have and being in the top 2 or 3 players of India. How do you think about that question for your business?
Thanks, Raj, for having me in. We roughly produce, I would say, 30 to 15,000 tractors per month, and we export to more than 80 countries. Our tractors are exported to US as well as to LATAM. To my mind, if I can switch over from, let's say, sustainability to resilience first, supply chain affects the entire gamut of the operations. For example, if you don't have a robust CRM, which is basically a good forecasting model, then to my mind, whatever supply chain you try to address, probably you may falter somewhere. So what we did was, we have a very, I wouldn't say a perfect CRM model, because no company, in my opinion, of course, the plan keeps on changing. But I think we have developed a reasonable, robust CRM. We just classify the customers in terms of hot, cold, and warm, and we know hot, actually 30 days conversion time. We produce roughly 650 models, state-wise and dealer-wise. There are some 700, 800 dealers, and of course, apart from exports. So we know broadly what exactly the models will move, and against each tractor, roughly 1,800 to 2,000 parts. We know actually which parts are required. So once we have, I wouldn't call it as again a perfect CRM, but a reasonable, good, robust model, which is almost, I would say, 80-90% accurate. We were able to predict basically, what is required from the supplier, and through a very good, I would say, backhand SAP for HANA, we were able to push it to the suppliers as far as delivery is concerned through the supply chain, and therefore we were able to monitor. And to that extent, I think it helped all the vendors to remove a great amount of uncertainty. So that is what helped us. Apart from the factor, for example, we do a continuous demand planning, meaning that dynamic planning. For example, we know most of the times we compete with, let's say, high commercial vehicles because the castings are required for both. So how do we really alternate between the suppliers when the demand for them goes up as well as for us? And similarly, we know that certain parts of the country get into some issues in Boeing sometimes. So, over a period of time, we've been able to factor all this, put it into our system, not just by intuition, but by systemic process. I think we were able to address greatly to the supplier a resilient issue, even though, of course, it is a continuous challenge, particularly when you move from tier 1 to tier 4 to tier 5, where the issues are a little different. Coming back to sustainable, of course, in terms of efficiency, I would like to say we are more inefficient than Hyundai because we produce only, but tractor requires 4 minutes to produce as compared to 1.5 minutes with the car. So, coming back to, I would say, sustainability, as they say, Hyundai said, that we are also now in the early stages, if you want to call it as from a capital point of view, from angel fund. So, from a point of sustainability, I would say we are still in stage 1, scope 1, scope 2. But then in terms of, I would say, internally we have done lots of work, whether it is air or water or pollution or power. We've done lots of work internally, benchmarked very clearly. ACO, for example, where we have a good stake, we benchmark with them, we benchmark with number 1 competitor, and we simply say that while we are not the best, we have improved significantly. For example, I think we would have been one of the first tractor company to move the tractors by train to Rajasthan. So that has saved a huge amount of cost as well as amount of fuel. We have been requesting the government that look, the inland water also, because it's the cheapest mode of transport available, and if it is well connected, which we know as of now it is not well connected, we certainly would like to make use of it. Therefore, I think, in terms of sustainability, these are the measures we have taken. Recyclable packaging, we have done a lot with vendors. Reused batteries, we simply ensure that it is collected back and then ensure it's properly disposed of. So I think we are there, but we have some way to go.
I predominantly come from an IT world, and a majority of my career has been at Microsoft. So when you talked about being able to predict, talking to many customers, one of the biggest focus areas has been around prediction, being able to understand what's around the corner. But to be genuinely at an organizational scale, to be able to get there and make it real on the ground is not a joke. And of course, it's a journey. And if you're already on that journey and hearing it from a tractor company, I think that speaks volumes. Listening to all three of you, I kind of just picked up my second question, which I would like to get into, is if we can go 2-3 clicks more deeper. If I take the Boeing's example, you talked about how single supplier sources are very critical, and it's important, it's imperative for your business to make them resilient. What I would love to understand is, what are some of your best practices going into the depth of making it resilient? And let's also use the word sustainable, but I'm not using it from the lens of a ESG or an environment. I'm using it from the lens of, how do I sustain what I have started in terms of keeping these guys resilient? In other words, what you've started as a great initiative, what are some of your best practices to make sure it continues to be done at organizational scale, at factory scale? If you could kind of help share that. And sorry, last part of the question, because I'll be mindful, then it'll give us enough time across the board. The last part of this question is, how do you recognize these supply chain partners who work with you and help you meet your priorities or goals around resilience and being sustainable? How do you recognize them differently? What does that mean for them to be invested into what you are doing? Because what you're doing is what you're doing. Equal success is only going to come when they're equally invested. So how do you make sure you get there?
I was thinking of, your question was best practice. It could be from India itself. Our supply base in India is operating at a very high level of performance, over 99.9% delivery on time, and then very high level of quality. But every day is a new day. So I think the first step, and we try to keep it simple. The first step is an understanding at the leadership level of supply base that the world is very competitive and performance is what matters. And gone are the days when you can say there is a force majeure condition, so I'm not able to deliver and so forth. So the question is, what's your value proposition and how do you differentiate yourself versus thousands of suppliers across the globe? As long as you understand that, the definition of resilience and the way they understand from the customer standpoint becomes very simple. The second part is, very healthy operations. A supplier can be resilient if their operations are healthy. So fundamentals, from finance to operations to the processes, they all have to be healthy. Now it doesn't happen when you go to a new supplier. Even in the case where there is a sole supplier and you still have some level of maturity, there is always some gap. So what we have done, you talked about best practice, and it looks a little odd, what I'm going to tell you, but I asked the suppliers to build that level of inefficiency in the plan. So what happens is that throws a cycle time which is inflated, that equates to a cost which is higher than what the optimal cost is. But it does not impact the customer requirement. So from the customer lens, you are trustworthy, you are resilient, but your operations have to be healthy as well. So how do you get there? So you start working on the continuous improvement. So you start taking out the waste from the system. There are different tools. Lean Six Sigma is one of them. Boeing has something called BPSM, which is a Boeing problem solving model. We train the suppliers on them. Once you start becoming better and better in your operations, start getting healthy and trustworthy, then you also look at the inventory level. Inventory, somebody said in the previous panel, is not something which is bad. It protects you. but you're moving from just in time to just in case. In case something happens, it's very common in India. There are strikes. It's very common that there is a shutdown. Something happens, and pandemic, of course, was global. So you start working on those elements. Whether you have to have the right level of inventory. I still remember in the COVID period, logistics was one of the things which nobody thought would be a problem. You deliver the part on time from the factory, but it reaches late in our factory in the US. So the logistics was so predictable. So what did we do? We start tracking the actual cycle time. And if you plot the curve, like, what's the variation? The span was like 120 days. How do you solve for a problem where your logistics is like 120 days apart? So we started looking at the better ways of doing that too. And lastly, apart from what you do to make your operations healthy, you have to get to a point where you start predicting and reacting proactively. And we make a lot of decisions. I make a lot of decisions on the gut feel. And very often they are true because you're basing that on certain data in mind. So as long as you're able to predict to the best of your knowledge and adapt and flexible, you can change some of the things at the last minute. And these are all the things that have helped us stay 99.9% on time to the business. And that is what resilience is. Now to your second question on how do we recognize suppliers? I think your recognition as an award. Globally we award 9 suppliers out of thousands of suppliers every year. And we have been having at least one supplier from India over the last 3-4 years. And trust me, it's like an Oscar kind of a ceremony that happens in the States. Performance is definitely one of the major factors. Sustainability, to your point, is getting very, very important. Cost, quality, delivery, customer interaction, communication, there's a number of factors that go into it. Our suppliers are getting there. So it's no longer cost, and we're talking in the networking session, it is about a rounded value proposition that you present. Supply chain resilience is one of them, sustainability is one of them, and this value proposition will keep going up from India.
Thanks, Ashwani. I think that one word you said probably sums it up. How do you make sure it's a rounded value prop? And it's not just strong on supplies, it's not just strong on resilience, it's not just strong on sustainability, it's healthy, it's being rewarded. I think it's a well-rounded end-to-end kind of thought about scenario. So Mohan, they're 3 unique businesses, so I tend to ask the same question, so pardon me for that. But I think there's depth and there's insight which is coming out from each business model, and thereby the repeat of the same question. How do you think about keeping it sustainable on the resilience practices? What are your best practices? And probably if you can go a little extra in terms of how you define the health of resilience, how do you measure it? Yeah. And of course, how do you report it?
Thank you, Raj. Before going into your question, let me just give you a few background about the quality what we practice in Hyundai Motors. The car which is being produced there are equally being exported also. The parts are same. In the similar line, in the same line, both the domestic cars will be produced and export cars will be produced. You will have a left-hand drive, you will have LHT, RST, petrol, diesel, and the different variants. The normally car which you see is only one model in the car, but there are 400 variants in the car for a model. Say for example, I-20 means there will be 400 variants. Then you can imagine the complexity of the parts which needs to be produced and supplied on time. That's the way we program the production schedule. All the cars are NCAP rating of 3.5 and above, which is equally one of the safest car. We can't compare it with the Volvo or other things and all, but at least to some extent with the Indian driving conditions, 3.5 and above is one of the good quality car with the NCAP rating. That's a quality which we produce. With this, there are 2 best practices we follow post-COVID. The reason why I'm referring post-COVID, previously we worked in a very, very ideal condition, not much of disruptions, everything was streamlined, and as you know that the Koreans are always aggressive, or else you would not be having the share of 20 plus market share. So post-COVID, we did two best practices. One is that value chain mapping. For a car to be produced, it takes about 18 months from the concept stage to the SOP stage. That's what normally it happens in any automobile industry. Simply the car is not being designed and it is not being produced commercially next month. It takes about 18 months for a car to be produced because there are various tools to be produced from various parts of the world. It has to be shipped to India for the production. And there are a lot of validation happens in various regulatory agencies like RI and other agencies and all. With this, the first practice what we did was, we identify a supplier based on various parameters like cost, delivery, capacity, all those stuffs and all. And we finalize this vendor. And equally, we also do a kind of validation for the same tool with the other vendor, so that in case if the first supplier fails, or for geopolitical reasons, for any other financial reasons or other things, we have the backup for the second, we have a backup with the second vendor. We can be able to have a seamless supply of parts. This is one of the best practices we follow, so that the parts are not affected. It's a matter of a few days we can be able to get the parts from the second supplier. And the next practice is, the tools which are being developed are made for a certain process or the molds which are being produced. Whereas in this case, equally we produce a kind of accessories for the said tool, so that we can be able to move the tool from the area of problematic supplier to the less problematic supplier or the alternative supplier, so that the second supplier is also available in a fraction of days, few days or anything, so that the parts are also available on time. This is what we do on this. And Hyundai recognition is something which is phenomenal on this. We do it on a every quarterly basis, where the vendors are being invited to the plant, and it's been rewarded or recognized by the MD for all the quality, various parameters. We have audit process we follow. And apart from that, every year we have an annual event. Incidentally, for this year, after a gap of 2.5 years, we are going to have it on March 7th. Partnership Day, we call it as a vendor conventions, Partnership Day. And in that, first 10 vendors will be rewarded. So it's a proud moment for them to be on the stage, that too being attended by the various celebrities, not celebrities, and this is not a film from our personalities or anything, they are all from the top-notch technocrats. It will be a good networking meeting, and they will also be rewarded in the August forum. That's what we do it.
Thanks, Mohan. I mean, looks like that's a common theme, right? At the end of the day, of all the work you do, individuals and businesses do love being recognized in some shape and form. You talked about having backup strategies for parts. I bought a car recently, a few months back. I bought a Mahindra Thar. The guy explains to me everything. I said, I love it. Here's the money. He expected me to go to a bank loan, blah, blah, blah. 1 week. I said, dude, here's the money. Give me the vehicle. He said, sir, waiting period 6 months. I said, I'll transfer it right now. He says, just wait. Comes from the manager and says, 1 hour delivery, sir. I got lucky or whatever, right? But the point here is, I got the car, but I didn't get the second key. He says, sir, you take the car today, I'll give you second key after 6 months. Never ever heard that. Then I figured COVID has done a lot of new things. And I asked them the same question. Then I had a chat with the general manager, and I'm like, so you're really going to give me a car without my second key? Guess what? I've still not received it.
Yeah, that's a different thing. Probably I can share with you offline when we are going to have the dinner. The reason for having not given the second key. I know the reasons.
Yeah, I'm sure.
If the audience are interested, probably I can share or...
No, the reason I brought this up, Mohan, is we're just talking about resilience.
No, Raj, in fact, we also follow the same thing. Initially, we had that kind of things. Now, we give both of the keys to them.
No, the point is how resiliency on what you do affects customer service. I know COVID's been out of our hands. It's been out of everybody's hands. You cannot do what you cannot do. But how resiliency and planning for it, I have probably only experienced one issue, whereas if you did not do everything you would have done, I would have probably experienced 80 issues. You would have brought it down to one. I'm sure there's opportunity for the industry to continue to take it down to zero and take it to a different level altogether. My point here is how interconnected experiences are with how you think about resiliency. That's what I wanted to say.
You should have this way back.
What we do in TAFE is, we actually stratify the models into repeater, stranger, and runners. Now, what we also did was a very adventurous action we took. In respect of strangers, we tried to attempt to produce make one sell one concept. You can imagine that when there are some 1,800 parts and then coming from several hundreds of vendors, if you want to attempt that make one sell concept, and if you're selling all over the country, logistics being the southern part of the country, and then you have to move goods to all over the country. Of course, when you attempt for exports, how difficult it is. But then how did we navigate or how did we manage this? We would have introduced this in several models now. Not of course all the models is not possible. We trained the vendors. We actually ensured that of course CI later on came to us, and a lot of vendors, other people also came to us and saw how did we manage it. It was a wonderful journey. We involved all the vendors and slowly taught them as to how to make it. So this was a great journey, and I'm glad to tell you that we were able to, I wouldn't say institutionalize, but we have made a commendable progress, and we even now continue to do this. That is step number one. Step number two, we have now started using what is called control tower, which I think most of the companies are doing. I'm sure Boeing would be doing it in a much bigger manner. We have not so far, I would say, progressed to the level which we would like to, but we have certainly progressed in the sense that we have a visibility of almost all the vendors in respect of not only their capacity but in respect of their finished goods. We have to move to the next level as to what is their raw material, what is that's what we are attempting, but that will take some time in our opinion. So the control tower concept has certainly enabled us to ensure that the inventory is controlled, not by us, but by them. Which is very, very important, because then that's the working capital as far as they're concerned. As far as best practice is concerned, what I can think of is we introduced a very, very cost-effective digital quality management system. What we did was, it was a hub and spokes model, meaning that we have data, since you are from a software company, you will understand. Data acquisition system, which is only in a hub, and then connected to the router, and then through the internet, to the mobile. We captured all the quality parameters at the line of the vendors, and then started tracking it, and therefore our quality guys can see it in the mobile. And therefore, we have introduced it for almost most of the vendors now, I would say. And several hundreds of parameters we introduced it. Now we are also now beginning to roll over for end of the line parameters. And therefore, we were able to reduce of course the PPM was just certainly lower, but we were able to reduce for these vendors to as low as 27 PPM. So you can imagine that how this helps the supplier, this helps us also to control the quality. So this is one of the, I would say, best practices which were introduced, apart from the robotic process automation which were introduced from, I would say, procurement to pay. I don't want to get into the details of that. As far as vendor recognition is concerned, I can tell you very, I would say, I don't want to use the word proudly, but maybe as a matter of fact, we ensure that the payment to the vendors is always made on time. Okay, and we know for certain that if their working capital is impacted, then business will be impacted. So, in fact, way back, I don't know, 2006 or something, I don't remember exactly, because we go through always some, tractor industry is cyclical. When we wanted to expand after the period of, let's say downturn, the vendors were not willing to invest. Basically because, how do I invest in downturn, which has just come out of the downturn. What we did was, those time, not compared to your $220 billion which you mentioned, we advanced 50, 60 crores, 70 crores. We participated in the debenture issue, we participated in the preference capital issue, we gave a huge number of loans which were deducted over a period of time, adjusted to the supply. And there was a huge amount of, I would say, not only satisfaction, but a great amount of loyalty was created, because they know TAFE will go out of the way to support, because these loans were recovered over a period of 4 to 5 years. But then this was, I would say, a practice which they know, the vendors know, that if there is an issue, they can come to us for support. Like other companies, we also have a vendor rating system. And most of the vendors, not I would say, no, I don't think, I have not heard any from any vendor, dissatisfied vendor. They'll all come and say that, look, sir, you are different, we would love to work with you. We would love to work with you basically because A, we build long-term relationship. To my mind, whatever resilience you build through digital, because we have got some spend analytics, etc., we're moving towards, as I told you, control tower. But all these are all, I would say, steps. But if you don't get the trust of the vendor, if you don't create the transparency, if you don't share with them what are your issues, therefore they support it as even a downturn, because they know very well that even in downturn, TAFE is not going to maybe a huge some days of delay, but they know they'll get the payment. So if you build the relationship with them on a long-term basis, then whatever you spoke about sustainability and resilience automatically follows, in my opinion. So the trust and the transparency, sharing of information, working with them. For example, new products. We have created a virtual platform now where our designers work with their designers. And over a period of time, I think we introduced this only a couple of years back, but then over a period of time, it has created a great amount of, I would say, not only cost efficiency, but also time efficiency. We're able to compress the time to build. So I think, if we start working with the partners, we call them partners in progress, we don't call them as vendors, and that actually over a period of time.
Thank you, Chandra. I think your continued theme, you started with CRM as one example and predictability and how you are leveraging digital and different shapes and forms to enable stuff. I think that's massive. I know we're on time's up. I would like to just take a minute and put out one other extra example that strongly comes to my mind, something I personally learned from. So at C2FO, one thing we've done with many companies or many customers that we worked across is, hey, how and what is it that we can do differently with your supply chain? Right? You all want to provide liquidity, working capital, that's great, but what is it that we can do differently that could genuinely add value back into the ecosystem and contribute to this word of being resilient? So we did one experiment with Walmart, and Walmart globally works with us in many countries. Almost all countries they operate in, they work with us. So one thing we co-designed with them is they had different priorities of how they think about their supply chain. So like one thing which was important for them was diversity and inclusion. So any women-owned enterprises had a different mechanism in their mind. Anything which was, so they had a scaling mechanism. Here are large companies, medium and small. How they think about these different sizes was different. Then they had critical supplies, anything which is central. So, hey, you're a supplier belonging to a category business of mine, which means you're supplying something which I'm actually selling back in my stores. That's critical for me because it's related to my top line growth. So how do I think about you as a core raw material is different, and thereby my rating mechanisms are different. Hey, you're a logistics provider, you are an intelligence provider, you are providing some other warehousing or something else for me to make my periphery services more efficient. So in simple words, they had a complex chart and what these different categories of suppliers meant to them. So we developed a rating mechanism like many other companies in the world are doing. We worked and partnered with a rating agency, and then we said, allow us to run markets for you where if, let's say, a woman-owned enterprise is coming and asking you for liquidity against invoices that you pay, what would you do differently? They're like, if it's a woman-owned enterprises, I will not accept pay terms more than 45 days. And they would like to pay them in case there is an early pay request. They would like to do so if the market is operating at, let's say, 6% in the United States and let's say 5% in Europe. They would like to give it at a 2% cheaper than the market. And that was their way of recognizing women-owned enterprises. If it's a small business, they had a different package. If it's a critical supplier for category business and it's a very critical to top line and sales in some of their store businesses, the way they gave the ratings were different. And everybody else, they have the main path which would come at normal market competitive rates, right? But that was something they've done in complementary with some of the other strategies that we talked about. Actually, that became an industry best practices, not not just with us, but with Walmart. I think they're known to be the global leader at doing something like this in that space. We've seen companies like Costco, we've seen companies like Amazon, I've seen a lot of other companies, Unilever, Colgate Palmolive, they've adapted something very similar to take it down the way. So anyway, I just wanted to put out that one extra idea in complementary to what I've heard from all of you. So thank you very much for being here and sharing some of your stuff. I've definitely learned of you. I've taken some notes. Maybe I'll continue to work with you to see if we can learn more in that space. So thank you very much and thank you for your evening.